Well, sometimes you just need, practical advice on what to eat and what not to eat. It's not always a big theological conundrum about the human body and what it means. And sometimes it's not even a big rabbit trail with big food, big agriculture, big pharma, but sometimes maybe it is. And my guest today is, I think, going to help us do a little bit of both based on our conversation before this. So Amy Migdalia, she's a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. She does a lot of stuff on the online space, helping people with, various different things. She's got all sorts of different content on her website, on her Instagram, but she also does some one-on-one coaching and some group coaching. So I think you'll benefit a ton from Amy. Thanks for being on the show, Amy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
So, your husband plays in the NFL. That's pretty cool. What's that like?
Yeah. Oh, man, it's been quite a journey. This past season would have been year 12 for him, which is crazy because he was a 7th-round draft pick, defensive lineman, and, as you know, it is hard to have a career that long in that position. But my husband and I have really looked at it as ministry, right? So we're kind of like Paul, going from city to city and team to team and just, being the hands and feet of Jesus and the light of the world. So it's been really cool. And in doing that, I have also learned a ton about how to keep his body healthy, fit, recover quickly, reduce inflammation, prevent injury. So all kinds of things.
That's pretty cool. And you know what? I'll just be honest with you. I feel like I needed to ask that because I've never had a chance. I always am the one that gets asked that question. My wife gets asked that question. So I had to just pawn it off on you because I know you've gotten 1,000 of those questions too. Hey, tell me about your favorite player that your husband played for or something.
Yeah, no, we're used to it by now. And honestly, my husband is so big. He can't even lie about what he does. Like when we're out and about, he has tried to convince people. He's like, oh, I play golf. And I'm like, nobody believes that. So like complete strangers come up to me like, you have to play football somewhere. So it's hard to get away from. But honestly, it's been such a blessing in disguise. I think a lot of people do look at it and think like it's very glamorous. And there are perks to it, sure. But it's a hard lifestyle. It is very stressful on the players, and then it adds an entire layer of stress on the family in the background because you essentially do not see your spouse very much from July to January. And so a lot of solo parenting, a lot of just, doing life by yourself. And then you don't live around family, so you have to find community with the men and women that are on the team, and depending on the city and the organization that you're in, sometimes that's easier to do in some places and a lot more difficult to do in other places. So, yeah, we've seen it all, been through it all, been on 7 different teams in 12 years. So it's been a wild ride and such an adventure, and I would not trade it. But the moving every 6 months can be quite the task.
I've got enough Marriott points to kill a horse at this point myself,
exactly,
so
exactly.
We get it. So most NFL wives, they aren't typically the ones that are doing the majority of like the help with the preservation of their husband's body and helping with their diet, nutrition, exercise, keeping them, enhancing their longevity. That's different. People don't usually wake up and they want to help. They don't wake up and go, you know what, I think I'm going to help people with their diet and lifestyle. I got to know just at the beginning, like, how did your health journey begin? Like, how did you get involved with all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question because you're probably like, wait, what? How did you even? So I was actually a former college athlete as well. So I've been in I say the health and wellness space, right? My idea of health and wellness prior to going back to school was probably warped, right? It was very much aesthetics. So based on how you looked on the outside, that was the determining factor on whether you were healthy or not, in my mind. And even after I got done playing college sports, I even went on to compete in a fitness show. Because again, it was very much about aesthetics. So I'm aging myself, but I went to college like 15 plus years ago. So anyway, back then it was about aesthetics. And honestly, what changed for me was when we had kids. And I say this on pretty much every podcast that I've been on, but my son at the time sprayed bleach in his eye when he was 1. And I like
Oh,
turned it
wow.
around and freaking out thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on? And you see like flames, skulls, call poison control. And I'm like, I went to my husband at the time. I'm like, what? Why do we have this in the house? And so the like journey around holistic and functional health actually began with my environment. So I actually started going through our house like a crazy woman and started swapping out all the very harsh chemicals for lower tox or non-toxic options. And in doing that, I actually watched some of my husband's, I wouldn't say health issues, but things get better or go away. So for example, he would always snore at night. Since we were in college, because we met in college and started dating in college, he was popping Allegra and Zyrtec every single day. I mean, since we were 18. Skin issues, all of that stuff went away. He doesn't take allergy medications anymore. He was sleeping much better, which, as you know, as an athlete, in order to recover properly, you have to have really good sleep. So that got better. His skin got better. Kid stuff started to get better. And then I thought to myself, okay, if this is what I'm putting on or around my body, I bet what we're putting in our bodies is even more important. So then I started going down the rabbit hole of nutrition. And I am actually an attorney by trade. So I have my JD and my MBA. So if there's one thing I can do, it is read and research. So I never practiced, but I started reading and researching and intaking all of this information and started making sweeping changes in our household from a nutrition standpoint. And I started noticing inflammation reduction, body fat composition changes in myself and my husband, our kids' constipation issues going away. So I started noticing that within our family. And then it extended out further than that. I started helping other family members and friends. And it got to a point after a couple of years that they were really pushing me to do this. Like, you need to just like help other people, to do this. Like, well, I don't have credentials. I can't say, hi, I'm an attorney and I'm going to help you with your health. So I made the decision during COVID to go back to school and get certified as a nutritional therapy practitioner. And the rest is history. And I've been helping people ever since. And a lot of my husband's teammates noticed big changes in him and just the longevity in his career. And that kind of snowballed over into me helping them as well. And now at this point in my business, I mean, we do everything on the preventative side. So it is not just nutrition and environment. We also run comprehensive lab panels, hormone testing. We do all the functional testing, lab testing. We essentially want to help people prevent or help mitigate and get rid of situations that they're in from a holistic and functional standpoint.
So good. I'm a huge proponent of regular blood work, getting the full panel done. You walk into your regular doctor, they'll test you for a couple things and tell you you're fine as long as you're not actively dying of something.
Oh, we hear it all the time. I mean, right now we are working with a group of people, and one of the ladies was like, I went to my PCP. I feel terrible. The PCP tells me everything looks normal, but like, I don't feel fine. I don't look fine. This, like, something is clearly wrong. And you get written off. And I think there's two issues here. One are conventional ranges that doctors are using. So if you're not familiar, conventional medical ranges are based off of the mean or average of 95% of the population.
That's right.
Which means that those ranges are going to change as the population changes. And if you look at the population right now, we don't have the healthiest population. We're sicker than we've ever been. So maybe this would have been fine 30 or 40 years ago, but now it doesn't hold true. So that's the first issue. And then the second issue is they're not running all the markers that are necessary to tell a full picture. And that presents two problems. A, they're either not trained to analyze and interpret every single marker, or B, the insurance companies won't cover the additional markers. And if insurance doesn't cover it, the doctor doesn't get paid. So of course it's going to be a fight between the patient and the doctor to get these additional markers run. For example, a marker that we see that should be run is insulin. It's not run in a basic lab panel. Usually you'll see hemoglobin A1C and you'll see fasting glucose, which are great markers. They should be run. But if we don't run insulin, then that doesn't really give us a full metabolic picture. And a lot of times we will see insulin out of range before we ever see fasting glucose and A1C out of range. So if we see that insulin is out of range and this person is headed for insulin resistance, potential prediabetes or diabetes, we can catch it early. But that's not something that's always run with your primary care providers or physicians, which is unfortunate.
That's a small example, I'm sure, of a myriad of other examples you could probably give.
Correct.
And I was just ranting on this on a different podcast, and I was letting them rant, and I got to like chime in because I like to get my jabs in too. But the whole system of the whole healthcare system, the whole big pharma, the sort of commingling of those, the pharmacy, what do they call the pharmacy brokers? Like they're sort of in the middle of all this, upcharging. But like, so why do you think your regular primary care physician, you go in, they give you like these like 12 things that they usually check? Like, why aren't they checking more nuanced markers in their blood? Is there like a resistance to it? Is it the cost? Like,
I think it's an education thing. Thing. It's no different than why, again, it's mind-boggling to me. I have seen with my own eyes in the over 1,000 people that we've worked with in almost 4 years, conditions reversed, symptoms mitigated. Like, I have clients whose doctors tell them they'll never be off metformin for the rest of their life, and I'm like, let's test that. And I have successfully gotten clients off of metformin or insulin, or even Ozempic if they wanted to stop that as well, with proper nutrition. But doctors aren't trained. Medical school, you're not getting the nutrition training. They're not teaching nutrition.
That's right.
Medical school. So I think that we're really doing doctors a disservice. I don't demonize doctors on a whole and think that they're just all insidious, right? I think that there's just a lack of education, and they are just repeating what they're taught. So in medical school, what are you taught? You're taught to diagnose, treat, and prescribe, right? So if somebody comes in with, for example, IBS, you're prescribing a medication for that, but you're never getting to the root cause as to why somebody might be dealing with irritable bowel syndrome, right? Why not look into food sensitivities and stool testing to figure out what dysbiotic flora? Do they have H. pylori? Is there parasites? Are we dealing with inflammatory patterns in the gut that we can heal from a root cause standpoint instead of just a blanket, here's some prescription medication? So again, I just think it's a lack of education. And again, who's paying for the education if we want to go down that rabbit hole? Why pharmaceutical companies are allowed to fund the medical education is beyond me.
So pharmaceutical companies, first of all, they market direct to consumer in the United States, but they also fund a lot of the studies that we see that help,
and
doctors.
They fund the education in medical schools.
And they fund the education. So walk me through this sort of, since we're going down this path, let's just do it. So walk me down this big sort of plan here. Pharmaceutical companies, you've got doctors saying you're gonna come in, you're gonna test, you're gonna treat, you're gonna prescribe. They've been trained this to a large degree, perhaps by these educational institutions that are funded by pharmaceutical companies that prescribe the medications that make the medications that they're told to prescribe.
I mean, if you think about it, to put it simply, it's all going to come down to money, right? Mm-hmm. If we teach doctors how to heal people, what happens to the pharmaceutical industry? Well, we don't need to prescribe all that medicine. So really the way that the system is set up is you're incentivized for somebody to be sick and for that person to stay sick. And if you look, the most profitable patient would be a sick child. Because if they enter into the sick care system at an early age, they're going to be in that system for life. So it comes down to money and incentives, in my viewpoint, or in my opinion. If the healthcare system was set up in a way to make people healthy, then that would also change the way that doctors were paid as well. And so I think there would need to be a huge overhaul. Do I think that that's going to happen anytime soon? No, because pharmaceutical companies have billions and trillions of dollars that they're throwing at this in order to continue to make money. And they also lobby. So if you're looking at like our legislative bodies, they lobby politicians. Hey, this drug is great, or we need to do this, or and it's not like that necessarily in other countries where lobbying is not allowed. So, I mean, Americans are really getting hit left and right by a money game, truly. So that's why we try to teach people like, hey, we don't want you to enter the sick care system. Or if you're already in it, let us show you the way out of it. Because you can use food as medicine. And the body, man, the Lord designed the body so well, so intelligently well. The body is always trying to heal itself. But we get in the way in what we eat or with toxins in our environment that hinder that particular healing or restoration.
Yeah, that's a good point you make here. Your body is such an it's intelligently designed, it's intelligently crafted, and it's incredibly resilient.
Oh,
To be able to handle what the world throws at it. But instead,
yep.
oftentimes, we kind of miss that in America. We miss the mind, body, spirit connection. And instead of becoming, or rather understanding that, we become good disciples of big pharma and good disciples of the educational institutions that sort of build this sort of system for us that we just sort of believe is like probably altruistically in our favor, and they care about us and they wouldn't steer us wrong. Certainly this pill should help me, and people like you, and you've interviewed others that are doing this online and helping people in preventative care rather than sort of treating IBS or some of the other things we mentioned with a pharmaceutical, and that's kind of where you come in, right? You want to help people put an end to this stuff.
Absolutely, and I do think that because I just look at my parents' generation, and there was a lot of trust with doctors in their generation and the generation before them. So our parents and grandparents, if a doctor told you something, that was like gold. You trusted it. There was no skepticism around it. And even to this day, I still have arguments with my parents or my aunts and uncles who are very trusting of it. What's interesting about our generation that probably doesn't exist in any other generation is we're the generation that grew up without the internet and then with the internet. And while there are, things about the internet that I'm like, oh, this is terrible, what it also did for us was it allowed us to question things and start researching on our own. That's something that our parents and grandparents didn't have the luxury of doing unless they went to a library, found medical literature, were going through studies and articles from, years past. So I don't necessarily fault our parents and grandparents for automatically trusting doctors. It is so much easier for us nowadays to access information, to be skeptical, to question things, and to test things for ourselves.
So let's play a little game. So let's compare what somebody might do walking into a doctor's office versus what maybe they perhaps should be doing in regards to preventative care. So let's say somebody's got, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, so they got high blood pressure, maybe some myriad of other chronic diseases. They're not feeling well, heart rate's super high. They go into their primary care physician. What happens typically, let's say, your regular doctor, they walk in, what happens?
In my experience, if they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or they have high blood pressure, hypertension, or even like high cholesterol, oh man, that rabbit hole. The automatic is, a statin, insulin, and blood pressure medication. That's going to be the standard of care. Now, there are situations where that is so out of hand that a prescription might be necessary in that moment to get things, the levels down and under control, but it has to be coupled with proper dietary and lifestyle factors to reverse it so that you can eventually come off of it. And there are doctors out there who are doing it correctly, right? The problem that I see is the doctors who put people on medications and tell them they'll be on it for life. There's no way to ever come off of it. And that's where I'm going to disagree. Because I have seen people diagnosed with diabetes come off of diabetes. I have a client who, in all 3 pregnancies prior to the pregnancy that she has right now, was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. She's in her 4th pregnancy. We worked together, and she was told there was a 0% chance that she would not have to go on medication, like she 100% would have gestational diabetes again. She is due in just a couple of weeks and has not had to go on insulin and was not diagnosed with gestational diabetes this pregnancy.
My goodness.
So again, that just goes back to like what the standard of care is. And I think that, again, this just goes back to education. That's what the doctors are told. And no doubt the pharmaceutical companies are likely telling them like, hey, once you prescribe this, they're going to be on this for life. There's no way to reverse this. So if that's what you're taught, then you're simply repeating what you've been taught. And I wish that there was more of a curiosity maybe in the medical field. And I think that there is. I think it is growing. I think a lot of doctors are starting to realize, hey, we can't just blanketly prescribe this Band-Aid solution. I don't mind prescribing this, but I want to see my patients healthy. How can we get there? I want that curiosity to continue to increase, and really to kind of like let go of this idea that because I'm a doctor and I have an MD, then I know better than everybody. Because I certainly don't take that approach in what I do. Like, I am a lifelong learner. I am always educating myself, and I am willing to change my stance on things as I get more knowledge or more education to better serve my clients and the people that we work with.
So you make a good point on the idea that, hey, it's like maybe I prescribe this for a short period of time, but there are other things I want to do so they don't have to take this forever. Despite the fact that obviously pharmaceutical industry is going to make some money on that person for probably the rest of their life. So let's say it's the opposite. They come in, they go maybe see someone like you. They're going into someone, maybe a functional medicine doctor that cares about preventative care and wants to go take the more holistic approach to this problem. What do they hear when they walk in?
Oh, well, when we work with a one-on-one client, as soon as they walk in, they're getting an extensive client intake questionnaire paperwork. I mean, it's like 15 or 20 pages, 300 plus questions. Like, we're getting down to like, how were you born? Were you born vaginally, cesarean? Were you breastfed? Were you fed formula? Did you have antibiotics? I mean, we're even getting down to your oral health. I want to know, have you ever had root canals? Do you breathe with your mouth open? Do you breathe nasally? How many cavities have you had? Like, the body is all connected. So we're literally getting a full idea and workup of what somebody can potentially be dealing with from head to toe. Symptoms, do you have gas? Are you bloated? Do you have dark circles under your eyes? Do you get sleepy in the afternoon? Do you have issues with energy? Are you fatigued? I mean, I'm trying to think of like all the questions that are on that questionnaire, but we're doing an extensive deep dive into their background. Our very first meeting is an hour and a half long. Like, this is not like, and I think that's what makes it different on the preventative side. When you walk into a doctor's office, the doctor has maybe 10 or 15 minutes to spend with you. That's not nearly enough time for you to understand everything that I'm dealing with, right? So after that paperwork, we're essentially going on this investigative journey in that first meeting to make sure that we understand exactly what you're dealing with, when it started, what your symptoms are, what needs further digging. Do we need specialty lab testing? Do we need stool testing? Do we need hormone testing? Do we need environmental toxin testing? Do we need comprehensive lab work? We run the gamut on everything. Like, we are going to try our best to figure out exactly why you're in the situation that you're in. And then after that, we essentially create a plan and protocol for you to start, and we work with people for 3 months at a time. Sometimes people extend, so it's longer. But at a minimum, we require that people have to commit to changes for 12 weeks. And
so
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so they're getting a ton of information, both the practitioner, but also the person that's, that's having the trouble. They're going to get a ton of information to know exactly where they're at for just like, they're probably also going to get, I mean, you tell me, that's what I'm asking, a couple actionable things to do like right away.
Oh, not just a couple. It's a lot. We make an entire list of things that we want them to change over the next 3 months. And then we stack those changes in a way to make them successful. Because if I have 40 things listed that need to be changed and I tell you to go change all 40 of them, you're going to fail, right? But if I can take these action items and break them up into, steps that they can digest. Hey, over the next 2 weeks, you're going to change this. And then over the next 2 weeks, you're going to change this. And they build off one another. People are super successful that way.
Right. So a couple of the things they might do, like I'm just going to shoot off from the hip. They're probably going to say, hey, avoiding processed sugars, you change the lifestyle, create some movement, hydration, minerals. Like, so for instance, I'll give you like a kind of an example. So I had a friend whose daughter got, diabetes at 11 years old, just a kid. And obviously, related to what they were eating. and they would eat, a couple peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, bought juice boxes, candy for dessert, dinner, tons of pasta, ice cream for dessert. And their solution after going to the doctor was taking insulin. Sorry, what was that?
I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay.
It's just blood sugar, blood sugar, blood sugar. When you're listing like pasta, PB&J, I'm like insulin, 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 insulin.
And that was my point. And so what they did as a result of their visit to their primary care physician was, okay, well, I can't eat as much sugar because the doctor did mention something about that. I'll take my insulin. So instead of eating 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I eat 1. Instead of drinking 16 ounces of grape juice, I drink 8 ounces of grape juice. And so that's oftentimes where people go. So you wouldn't probably be telling them to just cut their PB&J intake in half. You'd probably be saying something like maybe eliminate the processed sugar altogether. Would I be wrong?
Okay, let me tell you something about us. We play no games with people. We tell them, look, when you come to us and work with us, you're going to be making changes. This is not a have your cake and eat it too. We are not on the moderation camp. We are not in the all foods are good, no foods are bad camp. That's not what we do. If that was me and that was my child, it would be a full elimination of ultra processed foods, which includes refined sugars, anything out of a bag or a box. We're getting back to the basics. If the Lord created it, that's what we're eating. From the farm to the fork. That's what we tell people. If you see it grown in the ground or on a tree or raised on a farm, that's what you're eating, and you're not veering off from that, period. And it's no different for kids. So people will think, well, what should my kids eat? I'm like, your kids should eat what you eat. There should be no difference, right? We shouldn't be having the good food and then feeding the kids chicken nuggets and fries. Like if you're having steak and asparagus, the kids should be eating steak and asparagus. And so that's, we're pretty no nonsense with that. And I think a doctor telling somebody just cut back, that doesn't take away the insulin spike that happens. So a little understanding or basics on blood sugar. The way that somebody develops this is if there are constant spikes of insulin. So anytime we eat something that impacts our blood sugar, i.e. starch or sugar, your body, your blood sugar, it spikes. It goes out of normal ranges. And in response, your body's like, oh, emergency, emergency, emergency. We've got to get blood sugar back in range. And it releases a hormone called insulin. Insulin is our fat storing hormone. And it helps get that range back in this tight, I would say, a tight optimal range of blood sugar. But most of the time what ends up happening after a spike is the body releases so much insulin, it overshoots, and now our blood sugar becomes very low. And what are the symptoms of that? I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I have a headache, no energy. And what do you have to do to get that blood sugar back up? You have to go grab more of the sugar, the starch, the caffeine, the coffee. Then the blood sugar rises back up, and now the insulin spikes again. And you're on this roller coaster all day of blood sugar spikes and insulin releases. And when that happens, when insulin releases, your body stores fat for 6 to 8 hours. So you are not metabolically healthy during that time frame. And if you think about the diet that this child is having, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, insulin spike. Juice, insulin spike. Pasta, insulin spike. Cutting back on those things doesn't reduce the insulin spike. So it doesn't matter whether you had 8 ounces of juice or 16 ounces of juice. When you have that 8 ounces of juice in isolation, your blood sugar is still going to spike. If you have 1 PBJ versus 2 PBJ, it doesn't matter. Your blood sugar is still going to spike. So yes, our recommendation blanketly to every client is a full elimination of ultra-processed foods.
So you mentioned from farm to fork. Is that?
Yes.
Did I get that right? Okay,
Yeah.
Maybe you can break that process down. So people, because I know for a fact there are people listening that are in that spot, and they listen to the show, and they're like they email and they message on YouTube or whatever, and they want to know more. So farm to fork, explain that concept.
Yeah, that's the easiest way that we can explain to eat real food, which if you think about that, it's really sad that we as a society can't determine what is real and what is not real. Like 100 years ago, people would probably have looked at us like we were crazy for like, well, what's real food? So the best way, this is a litmus test. You're looking in the grocery store for things that are from the farm to the fork. So these are things that there is no middleman between the farm and whether it goes on your plate. So when you go to the grocery store and you look at the produce section, that's straight from the farm. And when you take that produce item, it's going straight on your plate. So we'll take a potato, for example, right? A potato in the produce section is just a potato. It's a single ingredient item that gets grown on the farm, okay? If you then go into the middle aisles and you see the bags of potato chips, well, now we have a step between the farm and the fork. We have man in between that took that potato, processed it, fried it, maybe added some other stuff to it for it to now become an ultra-processed item in a bag. You want to avoid that. So essentially, we want to take man out of the equation and go directly from the farm to the fork. So that means you're sticking with your fruits, your vegetables, your meats, your dairy, cheeses, butter, eggs, things like that. What I tell people is like, when you look outside, the Oreos are not grown on a tree. There are no cracker bushes, right? We're not growing crackers on a bush. It took some type of processing and refinement to get that end product, as well as additional ingredients that have been added to it. So I want people to eat single ingredient items that actually don't require a label. A banana doesn't require a label. When you go to the store and you see a banana, you know it's a banana. It doesn't require an ingredient label. Once you get down to the middle aisles and it requires an ingredient label, and for you to turn around and look at that ingredient label to see exactly what is made of, that's where we run into issues.
Yeah, we like to say, or I guess I like to say, just eat food as close to the way God made it as possible. So you've got
exactly right.
Exactly. So fruits, vegetables, animals. When you've got, like, I love how you said you insert man in the middle, God move over, I got this. Like, let me change this. What we miss so much is the financial incentive of these companies. They don't have your best interest at heart. They're trying to please shareholders. They're trying to sell as much product as possible, and that oftentimes comes at the expense of our health. And we're the ones that take the hit on that. And so, yeah, Oreos, bet you can't eat just one. Lay's potato chips, well, you pay for that later in Dr. Bill.
Well, and they also need to know that companies spend millions of dollars on what is known as the bliss point, right? So they're researching the flavor profiles and things at which consumers reach this bliss point where they have to keep coming back for more. So they make the food so highly palatable that, like, you can't just have 2 or 3 of them. You have to have the whole bag, right? And then once you've had the whole bag, you have to go back to the store to keep purchasing it. Another thing that people might not know is that many grocery stores, in order to be on the inside aisles of the grocery store, they require a minimum 9-month shelf life. So think about that.
Wow.
Grocery stores, and I only know this because I have another friend who's an entrepreneur who owns a baking business that's trying to get into retail. And she's telling me this, and I'm like, you're kidding me. And she's like, yeah. I don't make my cookies to be on the shelf for 9 months. But if you think about that, next time you go into the grocery store and you're in the middle aisles, some of those items have been there for 9 months or more. That's the minimum requirement, that they have to be shelf stable. How do you make something shelf stable for 9 months? You have to add some type of preservative to it.
Right.
What kind of impact does that have on human health?
Funny, fantastic question that someone should ask, Amy. I mean, so they're doing 2 things at once. They are hijacking your biology by making foods hyper palatable and getting to this bliss point, like you say, to get people to buy more. And then they also need to preserve those products for upwards of 9 months. So they've got to do that with a myriad of various chemicals, usually, things like are shelf stable, seed oils. And oftentimes those things are bleached and processed, so you can't tell they're rancid.
That's exactly right. I mean, seed oils, that's a whole other discussion. People are like, well, what's wrong with seed oils? I'm like, well, you have to understand classes of fats in order to understand why seed oils are so bad for you. There's 3 classes of fat: saturated fat, monosaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Seed oils fall into the polyunsaturated fatty acid category. These are the least stable forms of fat. The most stable forms of fat are your saturated fats, which have been demonized for the past 3 decades. Who knows why, right? They're not heart healthy. But saturated fats are the most stable because They do not react to light and heat. Like humans have been using saturated fat, which would be animal fats, for thousands of years. If you've ever hunted animals, so I come from a family of hunters, and you are skinning an animal, if you were going to cook that animal, you would use the fat from that animal, render that fat in a cast iron, and then cook the meat in it. And that's what humans have been doing for all of civilization. Enter seed oils, and you have polyunsaturated fatty acids, all of these people telling us that vegetable oils are heart healthy and saturated fats are what is causing heart disease. Couldn't be further from the truth. But polyunsaturated fatty acids are not stable to light and heat. They oxidize. So think about this. You look at like a canola seed. A canola seed is teeny tiny. In order to extract the oil from that, it is exposed to an immense amount of heat, light, and chemical processes, right? So they're using chemicals like hexane, for example, to extract. So once it's on store shelves, it's already rancid. It's already rancid. And then we're taking that bottle of vegetable oil, and then what are we doing with it? We're exposing it to more light and more heat, putting it in fryers, deep frying things, and now it causes a mess in our body. In fact, there's a doctor who wrote a book called Dark Calories, and she equated frying a French fry in seed oils being the equivalent to smoking one cigarette, because it creates the same toxic aldehyde compounds in the body as a cigarette does. So think about that. Now, you want to eat a sunflower seed raw? Go for it, okay? But we're talking about when we take that sunflower seed, we refine it, we process it, we expose it to an immense amount of light and heat that this fat was never able to withstand, and then we use chemicals to extract it. Now we got a problem.
Yeah, that's Dr. Kate Shanahan's book, Dark Calories. So I'll definitely link that in the show notes for folks if they're interested in going down that. If you want to, I'm all about getting red pilled on various issues around our health and big agriculture or whatever it is, and you just want to nerd out. That's a great book to read. So I'll put that on there. Speaking of all the various different things that are online, seed oils is a pretty large topic right now. It's really popular to have no shirt on and talk about how you're a carnivore and how seed oils are evil. And I don't necessarily disagree, but it's kind of a trend, and it can be a little annoying. It can be a little. What are some of the things you see online, health trends that either are incorrect, maybe that just annoy you, or both? Is that a fair question? I don't know.
It's a fair question. I think the biggest thing for me is the entire plant-based vegan movement, because it is not doing your body any favors. To assume that because plants are natural, that they're all good for you and they can do no wrong, is just kind of mind-boggling to me, because if you know anything about plants, they don't have teeth and claws like animals do. So how do they protect themselves? Mm-hmm. They protect themselves with defense chemical compounds. So you look at like nightshade vegetables that create solanine compounds to protect themselves from pests. Because if pests start eating a tomato, for example, that chemical compound that the tomato creates is going to ward off that pest. No different. People are like, well, all plants are good for you. Okay, well, you're not going to go eat poison ivy, okay? And if you were out in the woods and your child was like, oh, look, a berry, let me go pick it and eat it, you're immediately going to be like, oh, hold on. We don't know if this is poisonous, right? Because there's poisonous plants out there, okay? Now, this is not me demonizing fruits and vegetables, so hear me out when I say that. But to think that animal-based items are somehow unhealthy couldn't be further from the truth. That's one. Two, to assume that we can get our protein intake from plants, which is all essential amino acids, because your body does not create the essential amino acids. You have to get them from your diet, is also crazy. Because I hear it from people all the time, oh, there's protein in beans, and there's protein in quinoa, and there's protein. Well, first you have to look, you can't just say protein. You have to look at which amino acids are in these particular plant-based items, one. And two, you have to understand bioavailability. What is bioavailability? It's the body's ability to actually absorb the nutrients that you're eating. Animal-based protein is very, very highly bioavailable. So that means that when we eat a steak, for example, the essential amino acids in there, the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, the fat, our body can easily absorb those things. It's highly bioavailable. It's like with like. When you do that with something like beans, it's a lot harder to absorb the amino acid content in beans. Not to mention, beans also come with other things. They're very starchy. So if you're eating a ton of beans, that's a potential blood sugar spike. Now we have insulin issues. And then there's things like there's some anti-nutrients like lectins or phytic acid in certain plants, which of course, if things are properly prepared, we can reduce, phytic acid or lectin content. There's also things like oxalates in plants,
Right.
where, if you're eating too much oxalates in your diet, that has negative health implications. But again, I think that that's probably the biggest thing that, like, if it's plant-based, it's automatically healthy. That's a trend that I see. And then you also look at things, I'll tell you what annoys me. When I walk into the grocery store and I see the Beyond Meat patties, right? They're trying to emulate a burger patty, but made of plants. And then you flip it over. And I did this on my mother-in-law because she was eating these Beyond Meat patties. And she's like,
oh gosh, they're disgusting.
They're disgusting. I didn't tell her what was what. I screenshotted the ingredient label of the Beyond Meat patty and the ingredient label of dog food, and they resemble each other. She could not tell the difference.
Oh my gosh, that's disgusting. You know what?
Disgusting.
I'm a pastor at a church in Seattle area, and I randomly will have no choice but to rant about Beyond Burger meat, and it's not like, I don't know if that's the most godly thing to do, but I just end up doing it because I can't help it. It's disgusting and it's sad, and you've got this genetically engineered goo that is supposed to replace the meat sources and be good for the environment and be healthy and all this stuff. And there's all these ingredients. You say it resembles dog food. A lot of them have like seed oils in them, like you just described, for all the reasons they're terrible for you. And they're not good. There's nothing positive about them. And there's this altruistic like snobbery that comes with eating them that just can be infuriating at times. So I'm just like, what's the win in eating one of these things?
And it's funny that you say that because, like I said, I come from a family of hunters. So, the plant-based movement folks would probably look at me and think, let's call PETA on her. But I would say, whoa, your hands are not clean, right? Because in order to fuel your plant-based burgers, you are destroying soil with your monoculturing, where it's, you have these acres and acres of land where you're only growing one thing. There's no biodiversity in the soil. And by the way, you are killing a ton of life when you go and harvest all your soybeans, all your corn, all your avocados. So just because, the field mice or the rabbits or the worms and all of that don't look, cute like a cow, doesn't mean that your hands are clean of blood, right? Because in the plant-based movement, life still has to die in order to put that Beyond Meat burger on your plate.
Oh yeah, and yes, you don't hear about the field mice, these giant combines rolling through fields, destroying all the life that's there, and they don't even talk about the glyphosate they spray across all these crops in order to, and all the insects, just the entire infrastructure of what's happening.
You're essentially wiping out an entire ecosystem of life. An ecosystem. Think about that. The insects, the bees, the worms, the mice, the rabbits, like all of these, very small creatures that are there for a reason. They help bring, a good regenerative soil to the ground. And you're worried about the one cow. By the way, I can kill one cow and feed my family for over a year, but you have to kill thousands of, creatures or God's creation in order to get your plant-based burger. That's not going to feed you for a year. So actually, there's less blood on my hands. When I go hunting with my family and we kill a deer, that goes in the freezer, and an entire deer can last us, 4 or 5 months, depending on the size of the deer. So I actually think that it is less cruel to kill one animal and have it feed a family for a long period of time than to kill thousands of species in an entire ecosystem for a plant-based burger. And I know that's super controversial, but I just had to say it.
No, and it's not that good. And also, yeah, I mean, like, what do you do? Like, the trade off in terms of quality, taste, and overall health, I think speaks for itself, let alone the environment, which is oftentimes maybe even the argument for going plant based or vegan. But I do actually see that. You know, I'm black. My father is black. That in the black community, the vegan diet is really popular. I don't know. I mean, it's almost often a default, and I do wonder about like maybe where that originates from or comes from, because I do know there's some history there. It's
You know,
fascinating.
I wonder the same thing. My husband is black, so my in-laws are as well. And his dad is not like that. His dad is a hunter as well. My father-in-law is. But my mother-in-law has kind of gotten duped into the plant-based movement here and there. I have been, you know, I'm throwing a life raft. I'm trying to pull her back in, and I'm like, you have got to stop eating this. It is not good for your health. And so I wish I knew where that originated from. I probably should do some research into that. Maybe just like, you know, I think a lot of it is maybe documentaries that they see, you know, Netflix or Amazon Prime or Prime Video.
For sure.
I know that there was like a few documentaries around the plant-based movement, but there's so many discrepancies. And then you look at like who's funding the documentary, and you're like, okay, if Beyond Meat is funding the documentary, this is going to be heavily biased in their favor. And so sometimes I watch these just to kind of get educated, but then I'm like, okay, now I can see where people are getting duped here and there. So my guess would have to be TV, right? The propaganda that's on TV. Because nobody's like, she's not like she's reading medical journals about this stuff. So it's got to be coming from TV, because she does like watching Netflix.
Yeah, you know, that you put some dramatic music behind anything, and you could get anybody doing anything you need them to. I mean, it's just kind of how it works. Well, what else is, aside from vegan stuff, is there anything else online that you see? Because I can throw out a number of things and just get your opinion.
Yeah, well, okay, so I told you that I was a college athlete. I did a fitness competition, so I came from the fitness industry. And something that still bothers me to this day, because I still see it online, is the whole, like, you know, if it fits your macros, right? So you see these, like, bodybuilding guys who are telling you, like, hey, I still eat donuts and down pizza, and look how I look. I'm still shredded. And I'm like, man, I bet your insides are screaming. So that is another trend that I'm not a huge fan of, because you can essentially make any food fit your macros or fit your calorie count. But it essentially overlooks what type of calorie you're putting in, right? Because 100 calories of a Snickers bar versus 100 calories of broccoli is going to have a drastically different impact on the inside, from a gut standpoint, a digestion standpoint, a blood sugar standpoint, an energy standpoint, a cell standpoint, a mitochondria standpoint, a sleep standpoint. I mean, your brain, what you eat is code to your body and your cells. And so we tell people one of the most important decisions you make each day is what you put at the end of your fork. It's either medicine or poison. There's really no in between. There is no in between. What you put at the end of your fork at every meal is either going to help heal your body or it's going to hinder it. There is no in between. It's very black and white. It's very black and white. There's no gray area.
1985 called. It wants its bro science back. You know, that's kind of how I think about that. It's like, okay, you're a math equation. I eat 1,800 calories. I lose weight. And, you know, my wife was a college athlete as well. I obviously played college professional sports. I get it. Like, I get the whole, like, that's kind of how I learned. Bodybuilding.com. You know, I was on there in 98, like, Googling around as a 10-year-old. Like, what am I supposed to do? You know, how much protein powder do I take? But now we kind of understand the body's a little more complicated than, you know, a basic addition and subtraction.
Calories out. Exactly. Because people are like, well, I just need to be in a calorie deficit. And I'm like, not so fast. It's much more complex than that. And so I actually, we don't count a thing. We don't tell anybody to count a thing. Because when you understand how the body works and what you need to eat for it to function properly, you don't need to count anything.
Yeah. Well, I got to ask you about one more thing before I let you go. Couldn't I just take Ozempic and be done with all of this? Like, isn't that like, so give me your thoughts on Ozempic and whether or not that GLP-1s are good for you.
So the peptide itself is not inherently bad. Like GLP-1s is fine. Your body naturally makes it. The problem I have with Ozempic is really twofold. And again, other people who have spoken out against Ozempic, the doctors are ragging them and saying, well, they're not clinicians, they're not in practice. Okay, well, I work with clients and I see it myself. You can regulate your blood sugar and lose weight without the use of Ozempic, but it requires that people change. And I have heard this in the past, and I think it's true. For some people, it is easier to change their religion than it is to change their food habits, which is really sad, okay? I'm not a fan of Ozempic. One, it suppresses appetite, okay? So when we're suppressing the appetite to the point where we're nauseous and we don't want to eat, now we run into malnourishment. And when we're malnourished, what is the body going to do? It's got to get its energy source from somewhere. It's going to go after your muscle tissues, right? And so then we see muscle wasting, which healthy skeletal muscle mass is a key factor in longevity. So we need healthy amounts of skeletal muscle mass. So that's one. And then two, in the injections, there's other things in there than just the GLP-1. So I tell people, I'm like, you need to go read the insert, right? Because they're likely adding some type of preservative in this injection that's going to have an effect on your body. Now, I am not somebody who is like all or nothing. We're like, there are 0 cases when we should ever use prescription medication, right? If you are 500 pounds, you cannot walk, and you need that little, hey, I just need a boost here. Okay, use the GLP-1 to give you the boost you need to get that initial weight off so you can start walking and moving. Okay, but what I'm seeing is not that. I'm seeing the average American who wants to get those last 10 or 15 pounds off, and they're like, oh, well, this is my easy way out. And I just don't like that's the go-to. It's always these easy fixes, these quick fixes, but you will have a very hard time convincing me that any of this stuff comes without a cost or 0 side effect. Every single prescription drug has a side effect, period. Now, you can do a cost-benefit analysis for yourself, whether you think that the benefit of this drug outweighs the risk. Okay, great. But I think the way that Ozempic is being used right now is doctors are just handing it out like candy. Truly. And then I've also seen that people start to develop some eating disorders from it too, which presents a problem, right? Because you go so long suppressing the appetite that nobody talks about how to get off of it. So how do you get off of Ozempic in a healthy way so that you're now nourishing your body again when you've essentially been in starvation mode for that long? And then the other side that I'm not okay with is I don't want children to be on this, right? Because then you create a lifelong patient in the sick care system, and they're pushing for children to be on this. And I just think we're doing our kids a disservice. Like, we need proper education as to what we should be feeding the kids, and the parents don't always know that. And I know that there are very sad situations out there where, the kids' only option is ultra-processed food, and we can have a discussion around that. But I think to be pushing this to children is just, I can't. And I have kids of my own. If my kid was in a situation where, diabetes was a potential, I would do everything in my power to prevent them from having to go on a drug. Because, like you said, the body's super resilient. Children, in particular, are super resilient, right? Because it's not like they've been around damaging their body for 40 or 50 years. So kids actually bounce back a lot quicker than adults do. But if the parent is not feeding them what they need to be eating, then it's not going to change.
Yeah, it's hard for me to not imagine. I know there's probably rare circumstances for where kids have no choice but to eat this junk. You're
right.
Poor. You go to the school lunches. We could go down that rabbit hole. But if a parent is destroying the kid's body by giving them whatever trash they eat, and then they go take them to the doctor, and they say, well, just take this injection. This will solve your desire for hunger. It's like, well, parent, where's your responsibility in the stewardship of your family to understand how to understand and how to teach your child how they can properly eat, what are the proper foods they're supposed to eat, and they're making them, again, good disciples of the pharmaceutical industry instead of helping them follow the ways and teachings of Jesus in a way that says to steward your body effectively. I just feel like the onus is on the parent not the doctor at that point even to be able to change this.
Well, and you know what? The parents, I put it on the parents. I'm never going to put the child to blame here. And I see it far too many times. The parents have essentially given their authority to the child, right? So I'll hear it from parents. Well, my kid doesn't eat that. He or she won't eat that. Like, they don't like this. And I'm like, no, you have it in the house. Take it out of the house. The child will not starve. They might, throw a few fits in a week or two, but you're the parent. You are in control. You have authority. The child does not dictate what he or she should be eating. You dictate that. And I'm telling you, you can snap a child out of picky eating by taking your authority back. This happened to me as a young parent. Again, my son was 1, and I went to the pediatrician, and I was telling him, oh my gosh, the only thing that he will eat are the fruit pouches, and I'm cooking the food, but he won't eat it, and I need him to eat something, so then I just give him fruit or the fruit pouches. And this pediatrician was older. He was in his 70s, and I am so thankful for him. Really old school. He was like, Amy, if you stop offering him what you're essentially training him to refuse your food, because he knows when he refuses it, he's going to get what he wants. And I was like, oh, you're right. He was like, you cook the food, you offer it to him. If he doesn't eat it, he does not eat again until the next meal, and you offer him the same thing over. And he said, children are very smart. They're going to work off their survival instincts. They will not starve. Eventually, they will eat. And that's exactly what happened. So I told my husband, I'm like, that's it. We're done with the sweet, sugary fruit pouches. He has to eat real food, because at that time I did understand that he needed to eat well. And that's what happened. We took all that away. Whatever I cooked, that's what I put on my kid's plate. There were some tears in the beginning for the first few days and some fits, and I said, I don't care. And he refused breakfast. He refused lunch. We got to dinner time. He ate everything. And I have never had issues with my kids. And I tell the kids, listen, not everything that mommy cooks is going to be your favorite meal, but you're going to eat it. Okay? And that's it. And my kids they're older now, and they're great eaters. They will eat anything. And now they'll tell me, I don't like this. And I say, well, I don't care. That's what's for dinner, or that's what's for breakfast, or that's what's for lunch, and that's what you're going to have. It's either that or you don't eat. And that's the rule in our house. And it works beautifully. But so many parents are so worried about, let's not go down the rabbit hole of gentle parenting. So many parents are worried about their child's feelings and not traumatizing the child, and that they've essentially given their authority away. But little do they know that what the child eats is one of the most impactful decisions on their child's health. And so I don't play around with my kids' health. And I guess I'm more strict, but not really. My kids are not deprived.
Well, you're trying to help your kid. You're being a good parent is what you are. I guess maybe in America today we call that strict. But you also said something really interesting real quick on the Ozempic piece around the eating disorder. And I do see that connection. I also see the connection of learning how to get off of Ozempic. And you get off Ozempic, you gain the fat back, but because of the gluconeogenesis, the muscle mass isn't automatically added back on.
Correct.
When you start eating again. So now you just end up a bigger, fatter but less muscular version of yourself, and maybe that pushes you towards an eating disorder. Yeah,
skinny fat, exactly. Now there are some doctors who will require that their patients, be lifting weights to prevent that muscle wasting from happening, which I think is great. And they do require, dietary changes, this, that, and the other. And there are a few doctors that will recommend, that will, go through compound pharmacies that give very tiny micro baby doses of it. And I think that is a much better steward of that peptide than what the pharmaceutical companies are recommending, which is the full big injection of it that causes all the nausea and the lack of appetite and the muscle wasting. So I think that there is a smarter way to use the GLP-1s in, again, these specific circumstances. I don't think that just anybody should be on it, right? I don't think that we should just be handing out Ozempic like candy and saying like, "Oh, you have 5 pounds to lose. Here, take Ozempic." And I don't know about you, but I can spot when somebody's been on Ozempic. I mean, you can see it in their faces. You can see it in their body. I mean, they look, for lack of a better word, they look malnourished, truly. And just like, I don't know. They just like very skinny, almost no fullness to their face, and like not youthful. It ages people, in my opinion. So I'm not a fan. I do think that it can be used in specific circumstances, and can be used in a smart way by using these very tiny microdoses of it as well. But I do think the education around coming off of it too, because you should not have to be on something for life.
Well, I think that's the point here with this entire podcast is, are you educating yourself? Are you working with the right people in order to educate yourself? Are you just sort of trusting whatever mainstream media, your PCP, whatever, whoever is telling you? And so taking charge of your own health and wellness with a trusted professional is the way to go. Speaking of which, if people want to know more about what you do, where can they find you online?
So on my website, www.amymigdalia.com. Same thing on Instagram, at Amy Migdalia. Our business page is at Restore Your Health. The second E is a 3, because we take a 3-step approach to health. And that's where everyone can find me.
All right. I'm going to put all the links to that in the show notes. So if anyone wants to check out Amy and what she's doing, I highly recommend it. Amy, thanks for being on the show. This is fun.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
One more thing. The statements in this video or audio have not been evaluated by the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Information provided here is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. The information provided by this website and or by this podcast is not a substitute for a physician visit and should not be taken as medical advice of any sort or kind. This is a list of resources for further self-research and work with your personal physician if needed. By using any of this information, by watching, listening, or reading it, you are accepting responsibility for your own health and health decisions and expressly release this podcast, its participants, and its websites from any and all liability whatsoever, including that which might come from negligence. Also, don't smoke cigarettes, don't do drugs, stay in school, don't touch hot surfaces, and please wear your safety glasses when cutting wood.